The ocean is darker than the night sky, deeper than the tallest mountains, and colder than the hardest steel. Most of us float above it, unaware of what moves beneath. But some have seen it, the monstrous shapes, the glowing eyes, the jaws that could swallow a man whole. Tonight, we're not talking about myths or legends. These are true encounter tales from fishermen, deep-sea explorers, and divers who faced creatures that shouldn't exist, creatures that defy logic, that move faster than thought, and strike without warning. Imagine descending into the black abyss, the water pressing against your suit, and suddenly, something massive stirs below, something intelligent, something alive, and it's studying you as much as you're studying it. The cold, silent waters hide nightmares that no one on the surface could imagine, and some of those nightmares have left witnesses terrified, forever changed, questioning whether they survived by chance or by mercy. If you think the ocean is safe, think again tonight. We'll dive into the 12 most terrifying deep-sea creature encounters that actually happened. Stories so chilling they will haunt your dreams and make you fear the very water you swim in. Stay with us as we uncover the abyss's darkest secrets. And don't forget, subscribe to Farcical Fears if you dare to explore the unknown. Because what you're about to witness is real, it's horrifying, and it's waiting beneath the surface. Let's move to our first story. The ocean has always held a particular kind of fear, one that seeps into the bones and refuses to let go. It is endless, cold, and dark, and for most it is a place of mystery and beauty. But for a few unfortunate souls, it is also a grave. It was late June when James Porter, an experienced deep-sea diver, embarked on a routine expedition off the coast of Nova Scotia. He had done hundreds of dives in his life, each one meticulously planned, each one following strict protocols. Yet, that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the water swallowed the last traces of light, he felt something different, unease that gnawed at him, impossible to shake. James had been exploring a deep trench, an area rarely touched by humans. The descent was slow, almost serene at first, the kind of quiet that makes the mind wander. Schools of small, translucent fish shimmered in the faint glow of his dive lights, and the muted hum of his oxygen supply was the only sound. But as he reached a depth of nearly 600 meters, the water thickened, the world above disappearing entirely. Then, something stirred in the shadows below, a shape, immense and indistinct, that moved with unnatural grace. James froze, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He knew the ocean had creatures he couldn't possibly imagine, but this was something else entirely. At first it seemed like a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trench walls, but it began to grow larger, closer, and then it opened its mouth. Not a fish's mouth, but something monstrous, lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth, far too big for anything natural. James's first instinct was to swim away, but the creature mirrored his movements, cutting him off with terrifying speed. Panic clawed at him, cold and relentless. He tried to radio his team, but the water swallowed his voice, distorting it into an unintelligible static. The creature circled him, and James could see the scars along its body, old injuries that told of battles with other monsters of the deep. Its eyes, if they could be called, that glowed faintly, intelligent and aware, studying him like a scientist observing an experiment. He realized, with a dread that paralyzed him, that it wasn't merely hunting him, it was playing with him, testing his reactions, calculating his fear. Every move he made was anticipated, and for the first time in his life, James felt utterly helpless in the face of nature's unknown. Hours or, perhaps minutes, he couldn't tell, passed in a surreal nightmare of movement and shadow. The trench around him seemed to close in, the walls pressing him from all sides. His oxygen levels were dropping, and his lungs burned with the effort of staying calm, of conserving energy. Yet the creature never attacked directly. It simply loomed, circling, sometimes surfacing just beyond reach, letting him taste terror, but not release him. Finally, in a desperate bid, James remembered the flare gun strapped to his side. He fired one into the blackness, a streak of bright light that hissed and fizzled into the water. The creature recoiled, a noise like metal tearing echoing in the depths. It retreated, vanishing into the dark abyss from which it had come, leaving James trembling, his suit torn in places, his body scraped and bloodied, his mind forever marked by the experience. He surfaced hours later, gasping, haunted not by the physical injuries but by the knowledge that he had glimpsed something entirely beyond human comprehension. James never dived into that trench again. Scientists and divers warned him it was a region of deep-sea anomalies, but none could confirm what he saw. When he told his story to colleagues, some laughed it off as hallucination induced by deep-sea pressure and isolation. But James knew the truth. The ocean hides monsters older than humanity, creatures that watch, learn, and strike when least expected. And for those who dare venture too deep, there is no escape from the cold, intelligent horror waiting below. Even after surfacing, James's nightmare was far from over. Back on the boat, the night air was supposed to feel like relief, but it carried only the echo of what he had seen. Every shadow, every ripple in the water, seemed to twist into that impossible shape, the predator from the depths. His crewmates tried to engage him in casual conversation, but James could barely answer. His hands shook, and his mind kept replaying the sight of those serrated teeth, the intelligent glint of eyes that were not meant for human worlds. He felt as though something had followed him, an invisible stalker gliding beneath the waves, waiting for him to forget, for him to let his guard down. He barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the trench, trapped in an endless dance with a creature that could bend space and time under the crushing pressure of the ocean. Dreams blurred with reality. At one point, he awoke to the sound of rushing water in his cabin, only to find the porthole closed and the ocean calm outside. But the water seemed to whisper, a low gurgling sound that made his skin crawl. He wondered if he had brought something back with him. Not a parasite, not a wound, but a memory that could reach out and haunt him in the real world. The days following the dive were torturous. James returned home, attempting to settle into normal life. But even the smallest bodies of water, the bathtub, a drinking glass, a rain puddle felt like extensions of that abyss. His friends and family noticed he became withdrawn, obsessed with oceanography, encrypted research, and he started compiling journals of every unexplainable deep-sea encounter he could find. Reports of fishermen disappearing, sonar readings of massive unknown entities, and strange, unidentifiable carcasses washed ashore became his obsession. He began to see connections everywhere, patterns in the darkness, signs that suggested the creature he encountered was not alone. Weeks later, he was contacted by a marine research institute in Iceland. They had been tracking unusual sonar blips in deep trenches near the mid-Atlantic ridge, and his first-hand experience made him invaluable. Against his better judgment, James accepted the assignment, convinced he needed to face the terror head-on or risk being consumed by paranoia. The new expedition took him farther than he had ever been, into trenches so deep that light did not exist and pressure could crush a submarine like a tin can. This time, James was prepared, or at least he thought he was. Advanced submersibles, high-resolution sonar, and remotely operated drones were deployed, mapping the abyss as he descended. The deeper he went, the more the ocean seemed alive, almost sentient, as if the black water itself was aware of their intrusion. Then, they found it a massive figure, larger than any known shark or squid, coiled around a sunken vessel. The creature's skin glistened like wet obsidian, scarred and ridged, and its eyes reflected the submersible lights in a way that made it look almost human. James's hands gripped the controls until his knuckles turned white. The creature's gaze locked onto him, unblinking and deliberate. Unlike before, it didn't just circle. It approached the submersible with an intelligence that was impossible to quantify. The sonar picked up vibrations as it moved, a pulse that seemed almost like a heartbeat. The scientists whispered nervously over the comms, but James could only focus on the knowledge that this was no random deep-sea anomaly. This was a predator aware of them, possibly even anticipating their every move. Hours passed in silence, the only sounds being the mechanical hum of the submersible and the occasional crackle of communication. Then, without warning, the creature lunged not at the vessel itself, but at one of the drones, snapping it like a twig. The feed from the drone, cut abruptly, leaving only darkness punctuated by static bursts. James realized, in a chilling moment, that the creature was studying them, and that every dive, every expedition, was an invitation into its domain. By the end of the mission, James returned to the surface physically unharmed, but the experience had changed him permanently. He could no longer look at the ocean without seeing the hidden shapes beneath, lurking, waiting. Each time he watched documentaries or news reports, he imagined massive jaws tearing through the hulls of ships, eyes that measured human fear like a chemical in the blood. He never dived again into that depth, but the ocean had left a permanent mark, a creeping, inescapable dread that no sunlight or human company could erase. Even now, years later, James still receives strange emails from fishermen who swear they've seen gargantuan shapes beneath their boats, and messages from deep-sea explorers who whisper of shadows too large to be natural. And in the quiet moments before sleep, he sometimes hears a low gurgle, like water flowing over teeth, reminding him that whatever he encountered is still out there, waiting and watching. Let's move to our second story. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Marissa received the first unnerving call. It was from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Someone she had always trusted, yet whose voice now carried a strange tremor she couldn't place. He spoke of a small coastal town, tucked away on the edge of Maine, a place he claimed was off the map in every sense of the word. According to him, something unimaginable had begun stirring beneath the waves. That could not be explained by science, folklore, or reason. At first, Marissa thought it was some prank, the kind of ghostly exaggeration people sometimes use to liven up an otherwise mundane life. But the urgency in his voice was undeniable. He begged her to come, insisting that she needed to see it with her own eyes before it was too late. The journey north was long and fraught with unease. Marissa tried to shake the sense of foreboding that settled over her as the coastline approached. The sky, once clear, now seemed to have taken on a strange, sickly hue, as if the sun itself were reluctant to shine over this forsaken place. Every mile closer felt heavier, the air more suffocating, and the waves more violent than they had any right to be. When she finally arrived at the small town, it appeared deserted, save for a few weathered houses leaning precariously against the wind. There was an almost imperceptible sound in the air, a low hum, like something massive moving beneath the water's surface. It was not just the wind, it was something else, something alive. Her friend met her at the dock, his expression tense and hollow. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered, though there was no real anger in his voice, only fear. He explained that for weeks, ships had been disappearing in the waters just off the coast. Local fishermen, brave men accustomed to the seas, dangers, were vanishing without a trace. Whatever was out there moved quickly, silently, and with a predatory intelligence that no human had ever encountered. Marissa felt a chill creep up her spine. She had reported on mysterious disappearances before, but nothing like this. This was different. This was personal, intimate, and alive. They boarded a small vessel and set out into the open water. The waves lapped unnaturally at the sides of the boat, and Marissa's friend kept muttering under his breath, counting something invisible. Hours passed with nothing more than the occasional flicker of shadows beneath the surface. Just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson, the first attack happened. Something massive surged from the depths, smashing against the boat with a force that sent both of them sprawling. The water boiled and churned, and in that instant, Marissa realized the stories she had been told were not exaggerations, they were warnings. The creature revealed itself in fragments, a flash of dark, scaly skin, a glinting eye that reflected the dying light, a jagged maw lined with razor-sharp teeth. It was unlike anything Marissa had ever seen, yet it radiated a terrifying familiarity, as if it belonged to the collective nightmares of humankind. Her friend screamed, clutching the side of the boat, as the beast circled them, testing, sizing them up. Panic surged, but she forced herself to breathe, to observe, to survive. The creature was not mindless. It was intelligent, methodical, and calculating. Every movement was precise, designed to instill terror before the strike. Hours blurred into a nightmarish rhythm of attack and retreat. The boat was battered and leaking, their supplies dwindling. Marissa's fear evolved into a strange, clinical focus. She began to notice patterns the way the creature preferred the shadows. How it struck when the waves masked its approach. The subtle ways it communicated with soundless signals beneath the water. It was a hunter, and she understood, in some deep, primal way, that understanding it was their only chance. By the third night, exhaustion had become a living entity of its own. Both were soaked, chilled to the bone, and their minds teetering on the edge of collapse. But the creature began to change its tactics. It didn't just attack the boat anymore. It seemed to toy with them, circling closer and closer, sometimes staying just beneath the surface, almost watching, almost waiting for them to make a fatal mistake. Marissa realized that they were part of an ancient ritual, a testing ground where the sea itself had appointed a guardian, one that would not forgive mistakes, one that would not let them leave without paying a terrible price. The climax came. At dawn, a muted gray light filtering across a churning, broken sea. The creature attacked with a finality that neither Marissa nor her friend could withstand. But in the chaos, she noticed a narrow opening, a shallow reef they could maneuver through, if they timed it perfectly. With every ounce of strength and courage, they maneuvered the boat, hearts hammering, adrenaline screaming in their veins. The creature followed, but the reef slowed it just enough. A final suji, a blinding lunge, and they broke through the waterline, limping toward safety as the beast disappeared into the depths with a soundless roar that lingered in their minds. They made it back to shore. Shaken, broken, and forever changed. The town was still eerily quiet. But now Marissa understood the unspoken rule. Some mysteries are meant to be witnessed, not understood. Some horrors exist just beyond the reach of reason, waiting for those foolish enough to seek them. Her friend refused to speak further, eyes hollow, voice cracked. And Marissa knew she would never forget the intelligent, monstrous gaze that had studied them in the abyss. A gaze that promised it would be waiting for the next curious soul. The sea kept its secrets, as it always had, but Marissa carried the memory like a living shadow. Every time she looked at the horizon, the edges of the waves seemed to move differently, as if alive, as if something below still remembered her. She had survived, yes, but at a cost that would haunt every breath, every wave, every dark night. Ahead, the story was not over. Was merely another warning in a long, unbroken chain of terrors lying beneath the surface, waiting. Let's move to our third story. The deep sea had always held a magnetic, terrifying allure for those who dared to sail its uncharted waters. For Captain Ellis, a seasoned mariner with decades of experience, nothing could have prepared him for the encounter that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It began as a routine research expedition off the coast of the North Atlantic, a mission to study bioluminescent creatures in the abyssal depths. The waters were unusually calm, almost unnaturally so, and a thick mist hung low above the ocean, swallowing the horizon. Ellis's crew joked nervously about the stillness, but he felt an unsettling tension in the air, a prescient warning he couldn't shake. As night fell, the sea's surface shimmered with an otherworldly glow, illuminating strange, translucent shapes beneath the water. At first they appeared to be harmless deep-sea fish, their bioluminescence creating ghostly patterns in the dark. But soon, the shapes grew larger, moving with a speed and intelligence that defied understanding. The sonar picked up massive, moving objects beneath the hull, too large to be ordinary sea life. Crew members whispered among themselves, unease etched on every face, as Ellis tried to maintain calm and order. He had heard tales of monstrous sea creatures before, dismissed as sailor legends, but this was something far more sinister. By midnight, the first violent encounter occurred. A colossal shadow breached the surface, towering over the small research vessel. The water churned violently, and the hull groaned under the pressure of the surrounding waves. Crew members screamed, as the beast's massive, clawed fins struck the side of the ship, throwing people off balance. Ellis held onto the railing, heart pounding, as the creature's eyes luminescent and impossibly intelligent locked onto him. There was a chilling awareness in that gaze, an undeniable malevolence, and he knew that escape was uncertain. The crew scrambled to launch lifeboats, but the sea was no longer their ally. Giant waves lashed out, and the creature circled with terrifying precision, a predator playing with its prey. The attacks continued through the night, each one more violent than the last. Equipment was smashed, lights shattered, and water poured into the vessel as if the ocean itself had turned hostile. Amidst the chaos, Ellis caught glimpses of smaller creatures, possibly offspring or companions of the monstrous Leviathan, darting through the water with uncanny speed. The situation escalated to sheer terror when one of the lifeboats was caught in a whirlpool, disappearing into the abyss almost instantly. Screams echoed over the wind and waves, blending with the monstrous roars that seemed to emanate from the depths below. Exhaustion and fear blurred time for Ellis and the remaining crew. They managed to maintain a fragile line of defense, with emergency equipment, using flares and lights to keep the creature at bay. Yet every glimmer of hope was quickly extinguished as the Leviathan demonstrated an uncanny understanding of their tactics, predicting movements and countering them with lethal force. By dawn, only a handful remained on the battered vessel, shivering and drenched, their eyes wide with disbelief and dread. The creature had retreated into the deep waters, leaving destruction and death in its wake, but its presence lingered like a suffocating shadow, a reminder that some corners of the ocean were never meant for humans to explore. Captain Ellis's account would later be recorded as one of the most terrifying and credible encounters with a deep-sea entity in modern history. Scientists and skeptics debated the existence of such creatures, but the evidence, the shredded vessel, missing crew, and sonar recordings spoke for itself. For Ellis, the horror wasn't just in what he saw, but in what he couldn't understand. A primordial intelligence beneath the waves, older and more cunning than humanity could ever hope to comprehend. Every time he looked out over the ocean now, the calm, inviting surface reminded him of that night, and the knowledge that somewhere in the depths, the predator still waited. The terror didn't end when the creature vanished beneath the waves, even as the sun rose, casting a pale light over the shattered research vessel. The atmosphere remained heavy, almost suffocating. Captain Ellis and the few surviving crew members were too shaken to speak, their minds replaying every horrific movement, every glimmer of those glowing eyes in the darkness. They tried radioing for help, but the signals were distorted, as though the ocean itself resisted their cries, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. The ship groaned under the strain of the night's assault, and every creak and splash sounded like the creature returning to claim them. By mid-morning, an uneasy silence had settled. The survivors, trembling and disoriented, began assessing the damage, trying to piece together what had happened. Instruments were shattered, navigation systems offline, and the hull bore deep, jagged gouges, as though the sea itself had been clawed by something immense. Ellis walked the deck cautiously, eyes scanning the water for any movement, any sign that the Leviathan had returned. But the sea seemed deceptively calm now, almost mocking in its serenity, hiding the horrors lurking below, as they attempted to steer the vessel towards safety. Small movements beneath the surface reminded them that they were not alone. Shadows flickered beneath the waves, too large and coordinated to be ordinary fish, and the occasional splash hinted at unseen forces moving in the depths. Paranoia set in, each crew member questioning whether the creature had been alone, whether more of its kind were lurking just beneath the surface. Nightmares were now a reality. The ocean had become a living, breathing threat, and every ripple could be a death sentence. The psychological toll began to manifest. Some crew members became catatonic, staring into the abyss for hours, muttering about glowing eyes and impossible shapes. Others argued, their fear turning to anger, blaming each other for mistakes, for not acting fast enough. Ellis struggled to maintain control, to keep the remaining crew focused, but the enormity of what they had witnessed eroded confidence and courage alike. The sea had stripped them bare, revealing the fragility of human resolve in the face of something utterly alien. By the third day, rescue teams had finally spotted the battered vessel. Helicopters hovered, lights cutting through the early morning mist, and the survivors were lifted from the deck, shivering and silent. But even as they were airlifted to safety, the memory of the glowing eyes, the overwhelming size, and the silent intelligence of the predator lingered. Ellis knew that the ocean's depths had claimed more than physical victims. It had left indelible marks on their minds. Years later, Captain Ellis would recount the events in hushed tones, a warning to any who dared explore the deep. The ocean is not merely a body of water, but a realm of ancient, intelligent predators that mankind was never meant to encounter. Every sonar reading, every unexplained disappearance at sea, reminded him that the Leviathan or whatever else dwelled in those abyssal waters still watched, still waited, patient and calculating, beneath the waves. And for anyone listening to his tale, the dread was unavoidable. Some truths, hidden deep below, are too terrifying to ignore. Let's move to our fourth story. The fog rolled in thicker than a woolen blanket over the desolate coastline, smothering the moonlight and turning familiar landmarks into distorted silhouettes. Jacob had always been drawn to the sea, its endless expanse, calling to something deep within him, but tonight it felt different, oppressive, almost alive with unseen intentions. He clutched the railing of the old pier, the wood slick beneath his fingers, and listened to the water as it lapped with a rhythm that felt almost sentient. Stories of vanished fishermen and uncharted whirlpools haunted the small fishing village, whispered in hushed tones by the elderly, yet Jacob had never given them more than a passing thought. But as the wind howled and carried with it an unidentifiable, wet, metallic scent, a cold knot of dread settled in his stomach, tightening with each crashing wave. Something stirred beneath the black water, moving with purpose, and a low, resonant thrumming seemed to rise from the depths of vibration that shook the pier and resonated in his chest. The first sign that tonight would not be ordinary came when his lantern flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the surface of the water. At first, he thought it was merely a reflection of the jagged rocks below, but the shapes coalesced into something unmistakably unnatural. Tentacles, thick and slick, breached the surface with sudden violence, sending sprays of salt water into his face. Jacob stumbled backward, heart hammering, as the thrumming grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through his very bones. Memories of the village stories of the Leviathan of the fog surged unbidden till as dismissed as drunken superstition, but as the massive, glistening appendages slithered around the pier supports, Jacob realized that the legend had teeth sharp enough to tear through wood and bone alike. Every instinct screamed for him to run, yet his legs betrayed him, frozen with a paralyzing cocktail of fear and fascination. The water churned violently, forming whirlpools that seemed to suck the very light from the sky, and within them, he glimpsed shapes sulking. Serpentine forms, their eyes luminescent, reflecting a predatory intelligence that chilled him to his core. He tried to shout, but his voice was lost in the wind, drowned by the rhythmic sloshing of the waves. Panic clawed at his mind, blending with an almost hypnotic curiosity as he took an involuntary step closer to the edge. The largest creature rose from the depths, its body colossal, glistening with sea slime, dripping water onto the planks below. Its gaze met his, and Jacob felt as though the ocean itself had focused all its ancient wrath and sorrow into that single, piercing stare. The creature's maw opened slowly, revealing rows of jagged teeth, glinting even in the dim light. Jacob's stomach twisted as a horrific realization struck. This was not just an animal. There was intelligence there, a cunning awareness that surpassed anything he had ever imagined. He could almost feel it, calculating, evaluating, deciding the fate of the intruder on its territory. He tried to scramble backward, but the pier groaned ominously, its rotten wood giving way under the sudden thrash of the tentacles. Splinters flew like missiles, cutting his arms and hands, and he fell to the wet planks, desperately clawing for purchase. The creature's tentacles shot forward with terrifying speed, wrapping around the pier post and then snapping toward him, water exploding in all directions. Jacob twisted, narrowly avoiding the first strike, but the sheer force of the water hurled him onto the edge of the pier, his body skidding dangerously close to the open abyss below. His mind raced for a plan. Any plan, as the water bubbled and frothed with the massive predator circling beneath him. Jacob remembered the tales of fishermen who had survived encounters by using fire and light to disorient the creatures, though such stories were often exaggerated. He grabbed a discarded flare from a crate nearby, striking it with trembling hands until it ignited in a flare of blinding red light. The creature recoiled momentarily, a hiss reverberating through the foggy air, and Jacob seized the fleeting advantage to scramble toward the small rowboat tied haphazardly at the edge of the pier. The flare cast grotesque shadows across the water, revealing more of the Leviathan's immense body, and for a split second, Jacob felt the full scope of the horror. He was facing a monster that could crush him without effort, yet somehow, the bright, human-made light gave him a sliver of hope as he fought to untie the boat. Another, smaller appendage lashed out, wrapping around the vessel and tearing it sideways, sending water cascading over the edge. The flare clattered to the deck, rolling perilously close to the water, and Jacob dove after it, snatching it just as it threatened to extinguish. His hands burned from the heat, but he ignored it, holding the flare high as a signal of defiance. The Leviathan shrieked, or perhaps it was a soundless vibration translated by the air into something his ears could perceive, and Jacob realized that it was probing, testing him, toying with the intruder. Every hair on his body stood on end, a primal fear that had nothing to do with reason. But he forced himself to focus on the rowboat. With a final heave, Jacob untied the vessel and pushed it into the churning water, jumping in after it. The cold sea enveloped him instantly, but it also provided a brief sense of relief, as if the water were shielding him from the direct attacks of the Leviathan. He paddled desperately, the flare clutched above his head, sending erratic red light scattering across the fog and waves. Behind him, the creature's silhouette emerged intermittently, massive, undulating, and horrifyingly intelligent in its movements. It did not pursue recklessly, as if it understood the limits of the fight, and yet the pressure of its presence was overwhelming, pushing Jacob to the brink of exhaustion and terror. He realized that survival would not come from brute force, but from cunning timing, and the hope that the fog and the flare could buy him enough distance. By the time the shoreline's faint lights emerged through the fog, Jacob's body was numb, his clothes soaked and torn, and the adrenaline that had sustained him was fading. He collapsed onto the sand, looking back at the dark, restless water, where the Leviathan's glowing eyes still flickered in and out of view. Even from a safe distance, he could sense its gaze, a reminder that the ocean held ancient, predatory secrets beyond human understanding. As he dragged himself away from the waterline, Jacob swore he could hear it whispering, a low, resonant vibration carried through the mist, promising that this encounter would not be the last. From that night onward, Jacob became a recluse, obsessed with the ocean, drawing maps, tracking tidal patterns, and researching the village's folklore with almost religious fervor. He documented everything meticulously, hoping that someday someone would believe him, at least understand that what lurks in the depths is far older, far more intelligent, and far more horrifying than any human mind can truly comprehend. But even in his isolation, sleep was never complete. In dreams, the Leviathan returned, circling, waiting, watching. Its glowing eyes, an eternal reminder that the ocean does not forgive, and the stories were not myths, they were warnings. Let's move to our fifth story. The air had a sharp tang of salt and decay as I stepped off the rickety dock, the waves slapping hungrily against the weathered wood beneath my boots. I had heard the stories every local fisherman in the tiny coastal village whispered about it in hushed tones, but I had always dismissed them as drunken exaggerations. They called it the shimmering horror, a creature said to haunt the deep trenches just beyond the cove, appearing only when the moon hit the water at an exact angle. That night, the moon was full and unyielding, its pale light slicing through the darkness in jagged beams that danced across the churning sea. Something in the water stirred, a ripple that moved against the tide as if it had purpose, awareness, and malice. My curiosity was a curse. I had been tracking the coastline for hours, notebook in hand, recording unusual sounds and movements. The locals avoided this stretch of the beach, claiming the sand itself felt wrong, but I thought it poetic paranoia. That is, until I heard a wet, gurgling hiss that seemed to bubble up from the ocean floor itself, resonating inside. My skull, my pen froze mid-sentence, and every hair on my arms and neck prickled with a warning. My mind refused to process. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a stranded fish, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The water shimmered with unnatural colors, silver and green twisting like serpents beneath the surface, forming shapes that defied logic. The creature was awake. By the time I realized the creature was massive, it was already too late. The water erupted violently, sending a spray of salty mist into my face, and I saw the first glimpse of itiform, almost translucent, with scales that reflected the moonlight like broken glass, eyes like molten gold fixed on me. My heart thudded violently in my chest. It wasn't just large. It was intelligent, deliberate, as if it could read my fear, savor it, and plan its next move with precision. I stumbled backward, notebook clattering to the dock, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what was happening. It rose higher from the depths, a grotesque dance of fins and tentacles, its body elongating unnaturally. The shimmer of its skin created an illusion, making it seem as though there were dozens of creatures moving in the water, when in reality there was only one horrifying predator. The waves crashed around me, carrying with them an almost hypnotic hum that clawed at my mind, pulling me toward the edge. I fought against it, but my boots were soaked. The wooden planks, slick with seaweed and water, betraying my desperate attempts to stay upright. Every instinct screamed for me to run, yet part of me wanted to witness the full horror of it, to understand it, even as the rational part of my brain dissolved into panic. The creature's head broke the surface entirely, and I could see its grotesque features in horrifying clarity. Rows of jagged teeth curved inward, a gaping maw that could swallow me whole, eyes that shifted in human-like recognition, almost as if it was studying my soul. Then it struck. The attack was sudden, not with speed, but with an overwhelming force that seemed to bend reality itself. Water splashed across my face, my vision obscured, and I tasted iron and salt as the creature's maw snapped dangerously close. I was thrown to the dock, my body twisting violently against the wood. The sound was deafening, the creature's roar, a wet gurgling scream that seemed part human, part something unnameable. It circled, testing, calculating, and in that moment, the line between curiosity and survival disappeared. I scrambled to grab my notebook, clinging to it as if it were a talisman, even as the creature's shadow fell over me again, its massive form blocking the moonlight entirely. Hours, maybe minutes. I could not tell, passed in a blur of chaos and terror. The creature retreated slightly, vanishing beneath the waves, leaving the water shimmering unnaturally in its wake. My mind reeled, trying to process what had occurred. I was soaked, trembling uncontrollably, and more certain than ever that whatever I had witnessed was real. The locals' warnings were not mere superstition. They were survival guides. I realized with bitter clarity that I had entered their world uninvited, and they had noticed me. I barely made it back to the safety of my small coastal cabin, slamming the door behind me, but sleep offered no refuge. The memory of golden eyes, gaping maw, and wet, unrelenting hum haunted every shadow and flicker of the night. I knew, even as I write this, that I had not seen the last of it. The ocean holds secrets that mankind was never meant to understand, and some curiosities are punishable. My notes, once a source of scientific pride, now serve as warnings. This creature waits in the deep, shimmering, intelligent, patient, and it remembers me. I can still feel it lurking in the tides, studying me, calculating its return. The horror was not in the attack alone, but in the knowledge that somewhere, in the uncharted depths of the sea, a predator exists that challenges every law of nature. It does not hunger blindly, it hunts, it thinks, it waits. And I know that someday I will return to that dock, not by choice, but because it wants me to. The full truth of the shimmering horror is not the creature itself, but the inevitability of its presence in our lives. The ocean had always been beautiful, serene, comforting, but after that night, it became something darker, sentient, and merciless. Even now, years later, I cannot walk along the beach without sensing it beneath the waves, a shadow among shadows, waiting for curiosity to cross its path once more. Every ripple in the water, every shimmer under the moonlight, is a silent reminder that some secrets are meant to remain submerged. I have survived, yes, but at what cost? The knowledge, the memory, and the fear have intertwined, creating a permanent scar on my mind. Let's move to our sixth story soon, because the depths of horror never sleep, and the sea's monsters are only growing hungrier. Let's move to our sixth story. The ocean was never meant to be a place of solace. Captain Elias had spent decades on the high seas, charting uncharted waters, mapping reefs, and recording every anomaly he could find. But nothing in his years of experience could have prepared him for what lay beneath the waves one stormy night. It began with a low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrating through the hull of his ship as if the ocean itself were breathing. The crew whispered nervously, attributing it to the storm, or perhaps the old timbers of the vessel. But Elias knew better. He had heard that sound before in the deep, in the silent corners of the world, where the light never reached. It was a calling, a summons from something that defied logic and reason. As the waves grew higher, dark shapes moved beneath the surface, undulating in ways no known creature could. The hum intensified, now accompanied by ripples that seemed to follow. The ship patterns that spoke of an intelligence lurking in the depths. The crew tried to laugh it off, but fear clutched their hearts as their compasses spun wildly. Lights flickered, and the very water around them seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Elias's mind raced, recalling every legend, every warning, every sailor's tale he had dismissed as superstition. But the evidence was undeniable. Something massive, ancient, and utterly alien had awakened, and it was studying them. The ship creaked and groaned, as if protesting the intrusion of this otherworldly presence. And in the distance, just beneath the surface, a faint, bioluminescent glow began to form, outlining a shape that no human should ever see, a form that promised death, madness, or worse. The first signs of attack were subtle as splash here. A sudden tug there, but soon became violent, relentless, and terrifyingly precise. Elias realized they were not simply at the mercy of nature. They were being hunted. Every scream, every struggle, every decision would be etched into memory as the ocean revealed its darkest secret. The glow beneath the water grew brighter, revealing jagged outlines and movements that were impossibly fast for something so enormous. Crew members clutched ropes and railings, their knuckles white, as the ship lurched violently to starboard. Water splashed over the deck as a colossal tail swept past, leaving a wake of churning foam and screaming sailors. Elias barked orders, but panic had already set in, and the crew's fear rendered their actions almost useless. The creature's presence was not just physical, it seemed to warp reality itself, bending light and sound, making it impossible to tell distance or speed. Strange shapes appeared at the edges of vision, ghostly appendages, flickering shadows, and faint faces that seemed almost human before dissolving into the darkness. The ship's bell clanged inexplicably, though no one had touched it, and an eerie, guttural moan echoed across the waves, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Elias gritted his teeth, trying to focus, but a sickening feeling crawled up his spine. The sea was no longer just a body of water. It was alive, sentient, and intent on their destruction. One by one, the crew vanished. Elias's heart pounded, as he struggled to comprehend the sheer scale of what loomed before him. The creature's eyes weren't mindless, they burned with an uncanny awareness, tracking every twitch, every breath. The deck trembled under the force of its movements, splintering wood and tossing crates like they weighed nothing. A sudden, deafening roar shook the air, vibrating through Elias's chest, leaving him momentarily deaf and disoriented. Water surged onto the deck as the monster's massive head broke the surface, revealing jagged barnacle-encrusted teeth, each one longer than a man, glistening with brine and blood. Crew members who had frozen in horror now screamed and scrambled. But the creature moved faster than thought, snatching one sailor in a single, devastating sweep of its massive jaws. The screams were cut short, replaced by the horrifying gurgle of water-swallowing life. Elias lunged toward the lifeboat, his mind racing with plans. But every attempt to move forward was thwarted by waves that seemed alive, curling like serpents to push him back. The glow from the creature's body pulsed like a heartbeat, illuminating grotesque patterns across its scaled skin. Patterns that almost seemed to move with intention, hypnotic and malevolent. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the ship's rails, and Elias realized that the sea itself conspired with the monster. Waves forming shapes that mimicked human forms, taunting him, testing his sanity. A voice crackling through the radio in distorted fragments repeated a single phrase over and over: "Do not leave. Do not survive." Elias's mind fractured as terror and disbelief collided. Time lost meaning. Each second stretched, elongating his fear into something almost tangible, a weight pressing down from the sky and from beneath the waves. As the monster circled the ship, Elias glimpsed the outlines of other forms in the water-hulking shapes, moving in perfect coordination with the beast. as though it commanded a legion of deep-sea horrors that had never been seen by human eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to abandon ship, to dive into the churning, bloodied waters. But a primal understanding held him back. The ocean itself was no longer safe, and nowhere offered refuge. Each heartbeat felt like an eternity as the creature readied its next strike. And Elias realized that this encounter was not merely about survival, it was about witnessing the incomprehensible, facing the raw ancient power of nature in a form that had evolved far beyond human reckoning. He knew, deep in his bones, that if he survived, he would never be the same. The ocean had revealed its darkest secret, and the memory would haunt him for the rest of his life. If the sea allowed him to live at all, dragged beneath the surface by unseen forces, leaving behind only water churning with blood and the occasional glint of scales, Elias knew escape was nearly impossible. The radio crackled with distorted voices, sending his mind into a spiral of dread. Each transmission speaking warnings, threats, or fragments of sailor chants, long thought lost. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes became hours, and the storm outside seemed endless, as though the ocean itself had rewritten the rules of nature to trap them forever. And then, as if sensing his awareness, the glow shifted, rising from the depths, revealing eyes massive, predatory, and glowing with an intelligence that was both alien and horrifying. Elias could do nothing but stare, frozen in a mix of fascination and terror, realizing that they were not just witnessing a monster, they were confronting an apex predator of the deep, a creature that had ruled the oceans for millennia, unseen, unchallenged, and utterly merciless. Let's move to our seventh story. The salty wind bit at Marcus's face as he stepped onto the weathered dock of the abandoned fishing village, a place locals had long whispered about, but no one dared visit. The fog rolled in thick waves from the sea, swallowing the distant outlines of the derelict boats and the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving harbor. Marcus, a freelance journalist with a taste for the macabre, had always been drawn to the unknown. But the stories about this village of people vanishing, strange sounds echoing from the depths, and glimmering shapes glimpsed beneath the water made even him hesitate. Despite the chill crawling up his spine, he tightened his coat, lit his lantern, and began walking toward the main street, the wooden planks groaning under his boots as if protesting his intrusion. Every building he passed was a frozen relic of a life abruptly ended, shutters hanging crookedly, doors ajar, revealing the decayed interiors of homes abandoned for decades. In the eerie silence, Marcus could hear the faint creak of rigging and the distant lapping of waves. But beneath it all, there was another sound, a rhythmic, almost melodic gurgling coming from the water itself. He froze, peering over the edge of the dock, trying to discern its source. That's when he saw it, a massive, shadowy shape moving just beneath the surface, its bioluminescent eyes flickering like distant lanterns. Panic clawed at his chest, but curiosity, as always, won. He followed the path of the shape, noticing strange markings etched along the docks, posts, and the harbor walls, symbols carved deep into the wood, blackened with age and water exposure, their patterns unnervingly symmetrical. He pulled out his notebook, sketching the symbols quickly before continuing, each step bringing him closer to a small, decrepit boathouse at the far end of the pier. The lantern cast elongated shadows that danced and twisted along the walls, creating the illusion of movement. When he pushed the creaking door open, the smell of brine and decay hit him. Inside, overturned crates and rotting fishing nets lay scattered, and the floor was slick with a dark, viscous liquid that glinted unnaturally in the lantern's glow. As he stepped cautiously forward, Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him, like something was moving just beneath the surface. He glanced down and nearly stumbled back. There were deep scratches across the wooden boards, wide and jagged, as though a massive claw had been dragged across them. And then he saw them, faint, shimmering shapes in the dark liquid pooling between the planks. Forms that seemed humanoid at first, but twisted unnaturally, with elongated limbs and gaping mouths that opened wider than physics should allow. Marcus's heart pounded. He wanted to turn and run, but a strange compulsion kept him rooted to the spot, staring. A sudden splash behind him made him whirl around, and the lantern trembled in his hands. From the water, a figure emerged, tall, waterlogged, skin slick and glistening, its eyes the same phosphorescent green as the shapes in the water. It moved with unnatural fluidity, and every step it took left puddles of dark liquid that hissed against the wood. Marcus's instinct screamed at him to flee, but before he could move, the figure spoke, its voice gurgling, wet, and almost melodic, echoing in his skull rather than through the air. It spoke in a language he did not understand, yet he felt every word pierce through him, seeping into his mind like cold water, shaking. He stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern as the creature advanced. The gurgling sounds from the water around him intensified, and more shapes rose, forming a circle around the boathouse. They were grotesque reflections of humanities, some half submerged, others crawling on the wooden planks, all staring with luminous eyes. Marcus's vision blurred, his mind a chaotic swirl of fear and disbelief. He tried to call out, but no sound came from his throat. The lead figure extended a hand toward him, slick and webbed, and in that instant, Marcus understood. These creatures were once human, transformed by something ancient and malevolent lurking beneath the waves. Desperation surged through him, and he threw the lantern at the lead creature, the flames briefly illuminating the horror around him. For a fleeting second, it recoiled, giving Marcus just enough time to leap from the dock into the freezing blood-tinged water below. He hit the waves hard, swallowing brine as the creatures screeched in unison, their cries a haunting blend of pain and rage. Struggling to surface, Marcus swam toward a narrow channel between the rotting piers. The shapes following, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness like knives. Hours or perhaps minutes. Time felt distorted later. Marcus crawled onto a sandbank outside the village, shivering and soaked. Behind him, the fog hid the harbor, but he could still feel the pull of the water, the lingering presence of those who had not fully left their former lives behind. His notebook, miraculously clutched in one hand, bore the sketches of symbols and shapes, but the pages were smeared with dark stains that might have been ink or blood. Marcus did not look back again. By the time he reached civilization, dawn had broken, washing the world in gold light that contrasted painfully with the horrors he had witnessed. The story he carried was unlike any other he had chased, real, impossible to dismiss, and yet rooted in evidence that could not be ignored. Every detail burned into his mind, the sight of glowing eyes in the black water, the half-human shapes dragging themselves across the docks, the gurgling voices echoing in his skull. Marcus knew one truth above all: the deep-held secrets that were not meant to be disturbed, and curiosity, no matter how bold, carried consequences far darker than death. The memory would haunt him forever. A warning whispered with every crashing wave and fog-laden wind. And as Marcus shared the story later, recounting every terror to anyone willing to listen, he knew the village, the harbor, and the creatures beneath the waves waited, patient, silent, and hungering for the next foolhardy soul drawn to the water's edge. Let's move to our eighth story. It began on a night that should have felt ordinary, but the air carried an unsettling chill that gnawed at the edges of reason. Lila had always been drawn to the ocean, the way the waves whispered secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. But this night was different. The sea was restless, frothing and dark, as if concealing a presence just beneath its surface. She had taken her small research boat farther than usual, chasing bioluminescent phenomena that local fishermen swore were omens of something unnatural. The moment her hull cut through the water, a shadow flickered below, too large, too deliberate, to be a mere fish. Her heartbeat quickened as curiosity wrestled with instinct. The shadow reappeared, closer now, circling like a predator, studying its prey, its size grotesque, dwarfing her tiny vessel. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet Lila felt rooted by fascination and a deep, inexplicable dread. When the creature finally breached, the night erupted in chaos, scales glistening like wet iron, eyes glowing a phosphorescent green, jaws wide and terrifyingly immense. Water sprayed in every direction, drenching Lila as she clutched the wheel, a primal scream stuck in her throat. The creature circled again, testing her resolve, and then dove beneath, leaving a trail of frothing, blood-tinged water in its wake. For hours, she drifted, the ocean eerily silent except for distant, almost human-like moans rising from the depths. Her radio crackled with static, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she heard voices warning her to leave, or perhaps welcoming her to the abyss. She would never forget the sensation of being watched from below, the weight of eyes that seemed older than time itself, ancient and patient. Dawn eventually broke, but the shadows lingered, curling around her boat like smoke, leaving Lila with a terrifying certainty. Whatever had risen from the deep that night was no ordinary sea creature. It was something that had waited centuries in darkness, and now it had noticed her. The following days were a blur of sleepless nights and restless research. Lila tried to rationalize what she had seen, telling herself it must have been some unknown species, a mutation born from deep ocean pressures. Yet every fact she checked seemed to contradict her hopes for an ordinary explanation. Reports of missing fishermen, inexplicable shipwrecks, and glowing eyes glimpsed beneath the waves lined the coast, half forgotten by locals, but now painfully vivid in her mind. She began to notice small, chilling details. Her equipment would malfunction at the exact moment she tried to record or photograph the phenomenon. Compasses spun wildly, and her GPS readings seemed to vanish into nowhere, as though the creature warped reality around it. Locals stopped speaking directly to her, muttering warnings and shaking their heads at her boat as she launched it each evening. A single phrase repeated over and over in hushed tones: "The Maw watches." Lila initially dismissed it as superstition, but the dread that phrase carried gnawed at her, an instinctual recognition that something far older than humanity had been disturbed. One night, determined to confront the unknown, she ventured farther than ever, into a stretch of the sea mapped only by ancient mariner charts. The fog rolled in like a living blanket, thick and suffocating, muffling the sound of the engine and isolating her in an eerie silence. And then the water began to shimmer unnaturally, a sickly green that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She froze, mesmerized and terrified, as a massive shadow rose beneath her, more colossal than any shark or whale she had studied. It moved with deliberate intelligence, circling her boat slowly, examining, testing boundaries. Then, without warning, the creature's immense body broke the surface, revealing a grotesque head that seemed almost humanoid in its malicious awareness, jaws lined with jagged, metal-like teeth. Lila screamed as the water boiled around the boat, waves crashing violently, her small vessel pitching dangerously. Her eyes caught a faint glimmer near the mouth, something trapped, struggling. She blinked, and the horror of recognition struck her. A human, or what remained of one, flailed desperately, pulled into the abyss. Blood spread across the water like ink, and the scent, coppery and raw, filled the night air. Lila's stomach churned with nausea and panic, and the sound of thrashing echoed in her ears long after the figure disappeared. Every instinct screamed to escape. Yet the creature lingered, its massive eyes locking onto hers. A voice inside her, mind, or perhaps the ocean itself, seemed to whisper, "You belong to the deep now." The radio crackled again, faint and distorted, carrying fragments of warnings, cries, and indecipherable commands. It was as if the ocean itself was alive, a sentient predator that had claimed dominion over everything that dared enter its domain. Lila's courage faltered. She realized she had not just witnessed a creature, but had stumbled upon the remnants of an ancient force, one that hunted not for sustenance alone, but for attention, for acknowledgement, for fear. And she had given it all three. Morning came reluctantly, gray and heavy, revealing the wreckage of the night. Water stained red. The small boat scarred and battered, her own hands trembling. She radioed in a report, but it came back as static and garbled nonsense. On the shore, other fishermen waited, silent, eyes averted, murmuring only, "It's hungry again." Lila understood then that this was not a one-time encounter. The creature would return, testing, watching, and claiming more. And somehow, terrifyingly, she had become a part of its legend. A warning whispered to every soul daring to traverse those cursed waters. Days blurred into a haze of paranoia and exhaustion for Lila. She couldn't escape the memory of that night. Grotesque shape, the flailing human in its jaws, the oppressive sense that she had been marked. Even on land, the ocean seemed to reach for her, waves whispering secrets in a language her mind couldn't decode. Sleep became impossible. dreams were invaded by the creature's glowing eyes, the metallic rasp of its teeth, and the haunting voice that seemed to echo from the depths. "You belong to the deep." Determined to document what she had seen, Leela returned to her equipment, analyzing sonar readings and satellite images. Disturbing patterns emerged: swirls in the water where no currents should have been, massive shadows darting in and out of visibility, and inexplicable disappearances logged by local authorities. It was as if the ocean itself had grown restless, aware of human intrusion. Her colleagues tried to dismiss her fears as hysteria, but the evidence was mounting too quickly to ignore. She began to realize that the creature wasn't merely hunting, it was studying, anticipating, manipulating. One night, drawn back to the same cursed waters, she ventured farther than ever before. Navigating a narrow channel between jagged cliffs, the air was thick with mist, and the horizon blurred into an endless gray void. Suddenly, the surface erupted in violent waves, and the creature revealed itself again. This time, it was larger, its form more monstrous than memory could hold. A low, resonant growl vibrated through the boat, rattling equipment and forcing Lila to clutch her chest as fear surged like electricity. In a horrifying instant, she saw it open its massive jaws, not just to strike but to speak. Or perhaps, in some alien intelligence, it communicated a warning. The water churned with red, and glimpses of bones and shredded remains swirled in the current. Leela tried to flee, but the creature seemed to anticipate every movement, circling and guiding the waves to trap her. She realized that the ocean had become an extension of its will, every ripple a calculated obstacle. As exhaustion and terror mounted, she remembered the whispers from the shore, the warnings of the locals, and understood that she had underestimated the intelligence of the predator. Every story she had collected, every disappearance, had been part of a meticulous design. And now, she was at the center. When she finally limped back to the harbor, the sun was just beginning to pierce the fog, painting the sea in unsettling gold and crimson hues. Leela's boat was battered, her equipment ruined, and her hands still trembled from the encounter. She realized that what she had witnessed was not just a creature of flesh and bone, but an ancient force, a sentinel of the deep that existed beyond human comprehension. And in the silence that followed, she knew one undeniable truth: it would return, patient, cunning, and hungry, and the world would not be ready for what lurked beneath the surface. Let's move to our 9th story. The night was heavier than usual, a suffocating darkness that seemed to press down on the small coastal town of Greywater Cove. Fishermen whispered about strange shapes beneath the water, shadows that moved with intelligence, far beyond the understanding of ordinary sea creatures. Jonah, a local marine biologist, had always dismissed these tales as drunken tales and old wives' stories, until the evening he received a panicked call from a fisherman named Hal. Hal's voice trembled as he recounted a horrifying encounter. Massive, serpentine creature with glimmering scales had risen from the depths and attacked his vessel, dragging half his catch into the black waters. Jonah's curiosity burned hotter than fear, compelling him to follow the trail to the fog-laden harbor where Hal had moored his battered boat. The water shimmered unnaturally under the dim moonlight, casting eerie reflections that twisted Jonah's own shadow into monstrous shapes. As he leaned over the railing, peering into the abyss, a ripple, larger than any natural tide, surged toward him. A low, almost sentient vibration emanated from beneath the water, resonating through Jonah's bones. He froze, eyes wide, as the monstrous silhouette slowly broke the surface, a creature so immense, with spiny fins and eyes like molten gold, that it defied every law of marine biology he had ever known. Panic clawed at him, yet a grim fascination held him in place. The creature's massive head tilted, observing him as if calculating, before it vanished beneath the waves, with a sound like tearing steel. Jonah's rational mind screamed for him to flee, but he knew this encounter was only the beginning. Over the following nights, other fishermen reported missing boats, glowing shapes beneath the water, and eerie cries that echoed across the cove. Jonah, now deeply entangled in a mystery far darker than he anticipated, began chronicling these accounts, piecing together a pattern that hinted at intelligence behind the attacks. The town's fear escalated into obsession as families boarded up homes near the harbor and whispered of an ancient curse. Jonah ventured further into the deep, recording sonar readings and collecting water samples. Yet each dive revealed more questions than answers. Enormous shadows moving with unnatural speed, faint bioluminescent trails, and a feeling that something was always watching him. One night, while anchored in the cove, Jonah witnessed the unthinkable. A group of villagers were pulled into the water by unseen forces, their screams swallowed by the night as the monstrous shape surfaced once more, larger than before, its scales glinting with an almost metallic sheen. Jonah barely escaped, his mind teetering on the edge of sanity, haunted by visions of glowing eyes and spiked fins cutting through the moonlit waves. The line between nightmare and reality blurred as he realized that Greywater Cove was no longer a town but a feeding ground for an ancient predator that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for humans to stumble into its realm. Every sonar ping, every ripple on the water, every shadow became a harbinger of terror. As Jonah understood with chilling clarity, the creature was learning, adapting, and it would not stop until it had claimed dominion over the cove. And as dawn broke, painting the waves with a pale, deceptive calm, Jonah knew the true horror wasn't the creature itself, it was the knowledge that there was no escape, no refuge from the lurking leviathan beneath, and that he, along with the town, was merely prey in a game that had been set in motion long before humans ever arrived. The sense of dread only deepened as Jonah realized. The creature's attacks were no longer random, they followed a pattern, almost as if it were herding the villagers, guiding them into the water, with an intelligence that defied explanation. Night after night, he documented strange bioluminescent markings on the waves, fleeting shapes that darted beneath boats, and the way the currents seemed to twist unnaturally around the harbor, funneling people toward the unseen predator. The town's once lively streets now lay empty at night, the silence broken only by distant, unidentifiable sounds, groaning waves, splashes too heavy for a normal fish, and that low vibrating hum that seemed to come from the ocean itself. Jonah's obsession grew. He began venturing farther into the fog-shrouded waters in a small research vessel, mapping areas of unusual activity and noting odd, geometric patterns of floating debris and broken nets, evidence of previous attacks. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in streaks of blood red and violet, Jonah glimpsed something truly horrifying. The creature's massive shadow stretched beneath his boat, wider than the hull, with rows of jagged teeth visible even in the dim light. Before he could react, a violent surge of water lifted his vessel, slamming it back down, splintering wood, and sending him tumbling into the freezing, brackish sea. Jonah struggled to keep his head above water as the creature circled, its glowing eyes fixated on him. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, yet a grim, cold determination forced him to act. Using a flare and a makeshift harpoon, he aimed at the eyes, hoping to repel the monster, but the strike only enraged it. The water churned with blood, both from Jonah's scratches and the remnants of earlier victims. As the creature struck again, pulling the boat under partially and nearly dragging him down with it. Somehow, he managed to cling to a floating plank, gasping and shivering, watching the beast retreat into the depths with an intelligence that seemed almost human in its cunning. Days blurred into nights as Jonah barely survived, hiding in the abandoned outskirts of Greywater Cove, witnessing villagers vanish one by one and hearing whispers that the cove was cursed, that the sea itself had awakened. Every attempt to alert authorities was met with skepticism, disbelief, or bureaucratic delays, leaving him to face the horror alone. Yet in his journals, sonar recordings, and sketchings of the creature's form, he documented a truth that no one else could ignore. Something ancient, monstrous, and sentient had emerged from the deep, and it had begun claiming dominion over humans, learning their fears, and adapting its methods of terror. Jonah understood, with bone-deep certainty, that this was not an isolated event. The deep held creatures beyond imagination, predatory beings from the oldest legends, and Greywater Cove had become the epicenter of an unfolding nightmare that would escalate unless someone dared to confront it. And as the moon rose again over the blackened waters, he knew that whatever plans he made for escape, whatever warnings he wrote for the world, there would always be another night, another wave, another shadow beneath the surface, waiting to strike. Let's move to our 10th story. The coastal town of Blackwater Hollow had always been a place shrouded in whispers and mist, where locals spoke of strange happenings in hushed tones. Noah, a marine biologist recently relocated from the city, found himself intrigued by the town's eerie reputation. He had come to study rare deep-sea species that reportedly migrated close to the shore during certain lunar cycles. On his first night near the harbor, a dense fog rolled in, swallowing the pier in a thick, silent haze. The water lapped against the wooden posts in irregular patterns, almost as if the ocean itself were alive with intention. Noah felt a prickle along his spine, a sense of being watched, though no one else was in sight. As he prepared his small research boat, he noticed something odd. The surface of the water reflected a strange, iridescent glow, not consistent with any natural marine phenomena he had studied. Leaning over the edge, he saw ripples forming that didn't match the wind or tide. Then, a massive dark shape surged beneath the surface, so enormous it dwarfed his vessel. The water erupted as the creature breached, revealing jagged, bioluminescent patterns along its scales. Noah stumbled back in horror, barely maintaining his grip on the railing. The creature's eyes glowed like molten amber, intelligent and predatory, and its gaping maw revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. For the next hour, the sea transformed into a battlefield of survival. Noah's small boat was tossed violently, each wave threatening to capsize him. The creature circled, its shadow stretching beneath the waves like a living nightmare. He realized, in a terrifying instant, that it wasn't attacking randomly. It was hunting, tracking his movements, testing his limits. Every attempt to escape only drew the creature closer. With his hands shaking, he reached for his flare gun and fired into the sky, hoping the sudden light and noise might deter it. The creature recoiled slightly, letting out a sound that was not quite a roar, not quite a gurgle, something that seemed almost communicative. Like a warning, Noah drifted for hours, helpless and exhausted, as dawn broke over the horizon. The fog lifted, and the sea calmed unnaturally quickly, as if the ocean itself had swallowed the chaos whole. When he finally approached the shore, the town seemed untouched, as though nothing had happened. But the marks on his boat, deep gouges and scratches along the hull, told a different story. The locals he met that morning looked at him with knowing eyes, murmuring, "You saw it, didn't you?" It became clear that Blackwater Hollow's legends were not mere stories. The creature had been watching the town for centuries, and now, it had chosen to make its presence undeniable. Over the next few weeks, Noah tried to warn others, sharing video footage and sonar readings he had collected. But scientific communities dismissed his reports as errors or exaggerations, unable to accept the existence of something so monstrous and intelligent. At night, though, he could hear it calling from the deep, a haunting sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. His dreams were filled with its glowing eyes and the violent thrashing of its massive body. One evening, while he slept in his small cabin overlooking the harbor, he woke to a pounding at his door. Outside, the fog rolled in thicker than ever, and a shadow passed over the water. Larger than anything he had ever seen, Noah realized then that Blackwater Hollow was no longer just a research site. It was a trap, a testing ground. The creature wasn't merely hunting for food, it was marking territory, learning, evolving. Every vessel that came near its domain was recorded in its memory, every sound and ripple catalogued. For days, Noah watched the behavior of the beast, noting patterns that hinted at cunning and strategy beyond any natural predator he knew. Yet he couldn't warn the outside world. Anyone who had ventured too close in the past had disappeared, leaving only whispered tales and empty docks. By the end of the month, Noah's fascination had transformed into an obsessive compulsion. He documented every movement, every pattern of the glowing scales, hoping to understand the creature. It was then that he noticed something even more horrifying. The intelligence in the creature's eyes suggested awareness of him personally. It began appearing closer to the shore, testing the waters near his cabin, each visit more deliberate than the last. Noah realized that survival wasn't about fighting. It was about observation, caution, and respecting an ancient predator that had dominated these waters long before humans had named the seas. Despite the terror, a part of him was captivated. This was no mindless monster. It was an apex predator, a remnant of a world humans had long forgotten. Each encounter pushed Noah to the edge, blending awe with dread. He began to record audio patterns, observing the deep-sea creatures' calls, which carried a resonance that stirred fear in the marrow. On the night of the full moon, when the tides were highest, the creature breached closer than ever. Noah, standing at the edge of the dock, understood that this was a test. It circled, watched, and then vanished into the abyss, leaving only ripples and the echo of its haunting call. Noah never left Blackwater Hollow. The townspeople came to accept his presence as one of them, a witness to the unspeakable. Each month, the creature returned, and Noah documented, analyzed, and survived. It became a quiet, terrifying rhythm of life, an unspoken pact between man and beast. The ocean had its guardian, and Noah had become both chronicler and participant in a story far older and more horrifying than any human imagination could conceive. Noah's life became an uneasy rhythm, dictated by the creature's appearances. Each day he studied the water, logging the tiniest changes in color, wave patterns, or glowing reflections that might indicate the predator's presence. The townsfolk, once wary of his obsession, began leaving small offerings along the pier, nets, bait, even scraps of fish, as if acknowledging the creature's dominion and Noah's role as its intermediary. Nights were the hardest. He would sit in his cabin, listening to the waves, hearing the faint, echoing calls that seemed almost like whispers in a language he could not understand. Sleep became fragmented, haunted by visions of massive fins slicing through the moonlit water and jagged teeth glinting just below the surface. One stormy evening, a distant ship appeared on the horizon, its lights flickering through the fog. Noah knew instantly that it was too close to the creature's territory. Panic surged as he realized that the humans aboard had no idea what awaited them. The water churned violently, glowing with an unnatural bioluminescence, and the creature emerged like a living nightmare from the depths. Its massive form towered over the ship, each movement displacing tons of water, sending waves crashing against the vessel. Noah wanted to warn the crew, but the radio had been silent for days, and the storm made communication impossible. He could only watch, frozen, as the creature attacked with terrifying precision, disabling the engines and ripping through the hull with ease. The following dawn revealed nothing of the ship, no survivors, no debris, only a dark, oily trail. Across the water, Noah felt a chilling dread settle over him. The creature's patience was infinite, its memory unrelenting. It had tested the intruders, punished them, and now returned to its quiet vigil. The incident reinforced a horrifying truth. The ocean was no longer just a place of study or discovery. It was a domain ruled by an intelligence far older and more cunning than humanity could fathom. As weeks passed, Noah noticed subtle changes in the creature's behavior. It no longer merely observed. It seemed to communicate through gestures, circling in patterns, creating ripples that resembled symbols, even nudging objects floating in the water toward the pier. Noah began cataloging these behaviors meticulously, convinced that the creature was attempting to teach or challenge him. The line between fascination and terror blurred. He realized he was no longer an outside observer, but a participant in an ancient ritual between man and predator. One night, under a full moon that cast ghostly light across the harbor, Noah took a small rowboat out, closer to the deep channel, where the creature often lurked. The water was eerily calm, the usual glowing patterns shimmering faintly beneath the surface. Suddenly, the creature surged upward, revealing its colossal form in full. But instead of attacking, it simply stared at Noah, its molten eyes reflecting a strange intelligence. Time seemed to pause. The world narrowed to the space between man and beast. Noah, trembling, reached out toward the water, and the creature made a gentle, deliberate motion with its massive fin, a sign, he realized, of acknowledgement or acceptance. From that night onward, a fragile trust existed. Noah continued his research, but now with a newfound respect, understanding that the creature was not mindless but a guardian of the deep, testing those who dared approach. The town of Blackwater Hollow, once fearful of the unknown, gradually embraced the legend as part of their identity. Noah's recordings, videos, and notes became invaluable, a chronicle of a predator that had lived for centuries. unseen yet always watching. The legend of Blackwater Hollow would continue, whispered by those who dared approach the shore, a reminder that the ocean hides secrets older than civilization itself. And some creatures are not meant to be tamed or understood, only respected. Let's move to our 11th story. The wind howled through the desolate coastal cliffs of Greyhaven, carrying with it the acrid scent of salt and decay. For years, the town had whispered about the Sea Whisperer, a legend born from the hushed warnings, a fisherman who vanished or returned, muttering incoherent tales of something ancient and watching beneath the waves. Harper, a marine biologist driven by curiosity and skepticism, arrived in Greyhaven, determined to uncover the truth behind the eerie disappearances and the tales of glowing shapes moving beneath the surf. At first the town's residents offered only wary stares and vague suggestions to avoid the cliffs at night, but Harper's determination was unwavering. Her research focused on unusual sonar readings recorded in the bay, and her nights were spent scanning the restless waters, hoping to capture any anomaly that might explain the eerie phenomenon. By the third night, Harper noticed subtle shifts. In the water, faint luminescent glows beneath the moonlight that seemed too rhythmic to be natural. Her instruments began to pick up strange, low-frequency vibrations, almost like whispers vibrating through the hull of her small boat. She chalked it up to tectonic activity at first, but the patterns were too precise, too deliberate, almost as if the ocean itself were communicating or warning. Locals whispered of a figure, cloaked in mist, standing along the cliffs at night, watching the sea, disappearing whenever anyone tried to approach. Harper dismissed it initially as superstition, but one evening, as the fog rolled in, she glimpsed a dark silhouette gliding along the rocks with unnatural speed and grace, vanishing into the sea just before her eyes could focus. The following days brought unsettling discoveries. Harper found markings etched into the cliffside rock, strange symbols that resembled both letters and tentacle-like forms, worn by centuries of waves but unmistakably deliberate in design. Using her equipment, she traced faint thermal signatures beneath the cliffs, revealing hidden caves that seemed to extend far below the waterline, too vast and complex to be natural. Her research suggested a species unknown to science, possibly intelligent, and definitely predatory. Each dive into the murky depths brought increasingly unsettling encounters, fleeting glimpses of massive shapes moving in the darkness, schools of fish scattering in unnatural patterns, and an oppressive feeling of being watched from every direction. The whispers grew louder, a low, almost musical hum vibrating through her bones, as if carried on the currents themselves. Harper's obsession deepened. She began staying overnight in a small boathouse on the cliffs, rigging sonar and cameras to capture evidence. One night, as a storm rolled in, her equipment picked up a massive disturbance in the bay, a shape so enormous it dwarfed any known marine creature. The sonar blipped continuously, impossible to ignore, and she glimpsed a shadowed outline beneath the waves towering, undulating, with appendages that shimmered faintly under her spotlight. The storm intensified, winds lashing against the cliff, and Harper felt the first real brush of fear. The creature seemed aware of her, circling closer, its movements almost intelligent, testing boundaries. Her heart pounded as the water around her boat churned violently, and faint whispers, distorted echoes of human voices, seemed to rise from the depths. Over the next week, Harper documented numerous interactions. Small boats left adrift or capsized without explanation. Luminous shapes darted just beneath the surface, always keeping her in sight. One night, as she lowered herself into the water for a closer dive, she felt the first direct contactor. Massive appendage brushing against her leg, its texture slimy, yet strangely warm. Panic surged as she scrambled back into the boat, only to realize the creature's presence was not just physical, but psychological, tugging at her thoughts, pressing on her mind with a suffocating intensity. She began experiencing vivid dreams during the day, standing on the cliffs, gazing into the sea, feeling the whispers wrap around her. Consciousness like tendrils of water, the townspeople became increasingly wary of her activities. Old fishermen, once friendly, now avoided her gaze, muttering that some things should remain unobserved. That curiosity was a dangerous indulgence. Harper's recordings began to show disturbing patterns. fleeting glimpses of humanoid shapes moving beneath the surface, but twisted and elongated as if shaped by the depths themselves. Her sonar readings suggested coordinated movements, as if multiple creatures communicated silently, orchestrating their presence. The realization that she was not studying a single anomaly, but a collective, intelligent species triggered both awe and horror. One night, as a full moon illuminated the bay, Harper decided to confront the entity. She set out alone in her boat, equipped with cameras, sonar, and lights. The water lay eerily calm at first, but soon ripples emerged, forming concentric circles expanding outward from a central point. The whispers grew into a chorus of indistinguishable voices, pulling at her attention, dragging her focus into the abyss. Then she saw it, a massive head, textured like coral, yet smooth and glistening, slowly rising from the water, what seemed like eyes reflecting the moonlight with eerie luminescence. Tentacle-like appendages reached toward her, writhing through the mist, and she realized with terror that the creature had been guiding her, luring her into its domain. Her instincts screamed to flee, but fascination rooted her to the spot. As she attempted to turn her boat, the appendages grasped it, tipping her violently into the frigid water. She surfaced, gasping, trying to escape, only to find the bay alive with glowing eyes, each fixed on her, circling and pressing her toward the cliffs. The whispers became intelligible, words forming in her mind. Return what was taken, respect the deep, or join it. Harper's pulse raced as she realized these were the voices of those lost to the bay over generations, twisted into some collective consciousness, bound to the creature, fighting the pull of the water and the mental assault. Harper clawed toward the cliffs, dragging herself onto jagged rocks. Behind her, the bay roiled violently, the whispers fading as the creature sank beneath the surface, leaving only ripples and glowing patterns behind. Harper collapsed, soaked, exhausted, and terrified. In the days that followed, she documented everything she witnessed, but each night, she sensed the presence of the entity lingering at the water's edge. Watching, waiting, patient beyond human comprehension, Harper knew she had glimpsed a force ancient and intelligent, and though she survived, the encounter had etched a permanent mark on her psyche. Greyhaven remained quiet, the cliffs and bay seemingly unchanged to casual observers, yet Harper felt the whispering currents in her mind, even miles away, a reminder that curiosity in the wrong place carries consequences, and that some deep-sea horrors are neither myth nor monster, but something far older and aware, existing just beyond the fragile boundary of human understanding. She continued her research from a distance, warning others while documenting her findings. But the allure and terror of the Greyhaven Bay never left her. And in the dead of night, when the wind carries the scent of salt and decay, she swears she can hear the whispers, inviting her back to the depths. Let's move to our 12th story. The salty tang of the ocean clung to everything as the research vessel Nereus drifted slowly over the dark expanse of the Mariana Trench. Dr. Alina Voss, the lead marine biologist, stared into the abyss below, her mind racing with the possibilities of what might dwell in the uncharted depths. For months, her team had been preparing for this expedition, collecting data, reviewing old sonar scans, and meticulously calibrating the submersible. Nothing, however, could prepare them for the overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to emanate from the water itself. The waves moved differently here, almost as if they were hiding something beneath their black sheen. And even the gulls circling above seemed uneasy, their cries sharp and frantic. Elena's heart thumped against her ribcage as the submersible, named Abyssal Echo, detached from the main vessel and began its slow descent. Lights piercing the ink-black water, minutes turned into hours, each passing second stretching the tension tighter. Outside, bioluminescent creatures flickered like distant stars, darting in and out of sight, their movements both mesmerizing and unnerving. The first few hundred meters revealed nothing beyond small, translucent fish and drifting organic debris. But as they descended further, the water thickened with an almost tangible pressure, each meter amplifying the silence inside the capsule. Elena's voice trembled slightly as she recorded observations, noting unusual sonar readings and faint shadows moving just beyond the edge of visibility. Something was down there, she was certain. Something massive. Suddenly the sonar pinged erratically, multiple echoes overlapping each other. Shapes appeared, colossal and writhing, moving with a precision that was unsettling. The submersible's lights illuminated the first true glimpse of the abyssal giants, creatures with elongated limbs, eyes reflecting a strange phosphorescent glow and skin like molten steel, stretching impossibly long across the dark water. Elena's breath caught, a mixture of awe and terror. These were no ordinary deep-sea creatures. Their size, intelligence, and coordinated movement suggested something far older, predatory, and horrifyingly aware of the intruders in its domain. As they attempted to maneuver around a rocky outcrop, a massive appendage shot across the viewport, striking the submersible with bone-jarring force. Warning alarms screamed as the hull trembled violently, sending instruments clattering. Elena gripped the controls tightly, sweat mixing with seawater condensation, while the sonar displayed multiple, fast-moving entities circling them. One of the creature's massive eyes came into view, cold and calculating, its gaze locking on the tiny human vessel like a predator assessing prey. Fear rippled through the crew, but there was no escape. The submersible's thrusters strained against the invisible currents created by these gargantuan beings. Time seemed to distort, minutes stretching into hours as the abyssal echo was pursued relentlessly. Every maneuver to evade the creatures resulted in a new, unforeseen threat. Crushing pressure waves, tentacles scraping against the reinforced hull, and eerie high-pitched signals that penetrated the minds of those inside. Elena's thoughts became fragmented, memories of her past blending with the present terror, leaving her questioning reality itself. The creatures seemed to manipulate not only the water, but perception, as though the abyss had consciousness. A sudden jolt threw the submersible against the rocky trench wall, leaving a deep gouge in the metal. Lights flickered, and the voice of her co-pilot trembled over the intercom. We can't go any deeper. Whatever these things are, they're aware of us." Elena's own panic bubbled, but she forced herself to stay calm, recalling every protocol and emergency measure. Yet, it was clear that standard procedure offered no protection here. The abyss had rules of its own, and they were not designed for humans. Amidst the chaos, a haunting realization struck Elena. The creatures were not merely hunting, they were studying, cataloging, and responding. Patterns emerged in their movement, almost as if they were communicating with each other in ways humans couldn't comprehend. One massive form lingered just outside the main viewport, its eye glowing with an intelligence that froze her to the core. It pulsed, subtly shifting the water around them, and in that moment, Elena felt an ancient awareness, an acknowledgement of human intrusion into a world that had never been meant to intersect with theirs. The submersible's power began to fail, systems shutting down one by one as the massive appendages struck repeatedly. Panic clawed at Elena's mind, yet amidst the terror, a sliver of clarity emerged. She activated the emergency ascent, knowing it might not be enough. The ascent was torturous, currents ripping at the vessel, dragging it in directions they could not control. The creatures followed, their massive forms twisting around the submersible like living shadows. Every sonar blip brought them closer, and the feeling of being consumed by the darkness became almost tangible. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the submersible broke the upper layers of the trench. Light from the surface mingled with the bioluminescent glow, revealing the horrifying scale of what they had encountered. Multiple colossal silhouettes disappeared into the black, leaving turbulent waves and a silence that was deafening. Elena's hands shook as she guided the vessel back to the main ship, her mind racing with disbelief and trauma. They had survived, but at a cost that could never be fully measured. The abyss had marked them, and the secrets of the deep were no longer just a mystery, they were a reminder of humanity's fragile place in the world. Weeks later, the recordings were reviewed, and the scientific community was aghast. Patterns, movements, and shapes suggested something that challenged everything known about oceanic life. Yet Elena knew the truth would never be fully accepted. The deep sea was alive in ways humanity could scarcely comprehend, and some encounters were never meant to be fully explained. The abyss watched, remembered, and waited. And for those who had witnessed it, the terror would never end. The memory of the glowing eyes and crushing, force of the unknown entities haunted Elena's dreams. Even in the safety of daylight and familiar surroundings, the sounds of the deep echoed in her ears, an omnipresent reminder that the ocean's most terrifying secrets were alive, awake, and forever beyond human control. The final note in her log read simply, "We were not meant to see this. We were not meant to survive."